Okay, let's dive in. Can you even imagine a criminal group pulling in something like $100 billion just during one phase, the whole cigarette smuggling boom?
It's pretty staggering, isn't it?
Yeah,
Gives you a real sense of the scale we're dealing with when we talk about the Serbian Mafia.
absolutely. And this isn't just local stuff. We're talking international, right?
Yeah.
Smuggling, drugs, arms.
Oh, yeah. It started back in Yugoslavia, maybe the 70s, but it's grown into this huge network. Europe, Australia, the Americas, even Africa.
Wow. So today, our mission really is to cut through all the information and the sources we looked at, pull out the most important bits, the surprising stuff about this network.
Exactly. And for you listening, we know you want the key info, but without getting totally bogged down.
Right. So we've laid it out to hopefully give you a clear picture, the origins, how they grew, the big players. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start at the beginning, the
Yeah.
70s.
Okay, the emergence. What's the story there?
Well, you had Yugoslavs moving to Western Europe, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, places like that, and some formed these early criminal groups.
Okay, expats involved in crime, robberies and things?
Yeah, robberies, heists. But here's the really interesting part, the alleged link to the Yugoslav security services back home.
Security services? You mean like the secret police?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
The story goes they allegedly gave these guys weapons, protection,
In exchange for what?
information, intelligence, and maybe even carrying out assassinations, political ones.
Whoa! Okay, so not just random crime. A state connection, potentially, right from the start.
That's the allegation. And the supposed backing, plus the money from crime, it really helped them get established in Europe through the 80s.
Right. And this is where figures like Ljubomir Magash come in. Yuba Zemanek, the godfather.
Exactly. He became a huge figure based mainly in Germany and Italy. Really dominant.
What made him the godfather? How did he get that power?
He was apparently ruthless, but also strategic. He brought different factions together, set up hierarchies, demanded loyalty. Basically, he organized
Made them more effective.
definitely amplified their power across Western Europe significantly.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing for him, was it? He got assassinated.
Yeah, 1986. Killed by a rival, Goran Vukovic. Shows how volatile it all was.
So internal fights were common even then.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Fighting for control, for territory.
Hmm.
It's always been part of the game. Malgash's death was a big deal, but just one example of how these things often end.
And there were others back then, too, influential figures.
Sure. Stephen Markovich, his death was mysterious, linked to French politics somehow. And a Novikas, Steve Jovanovic.
Gentleman robber.
That's him. Known for these really elaborate, well-planned robberies.
Yeah.
Almost like a precursor to the Pink Panthers, you could say.
Interesting. So the seeds of this larger, more organized thing were being sown. Then the 90s happen, Yugoslavia breaks apart. Huge turning point.
Massive. A complete watershed moment. You had chaos, conflict,
Yeah.
and a lot of these Serbian criminals who'd been operating abroad came back home.
And found
Yeah.
opportunity.
Loads of it. Plus, you had the economic collapse, international sanctions. It was dire for many ordinary people. Organized crime suddenly looked like a way out, a way to make money, however illegal.
And the line between crime and the state, it got even blurrier.
Much blurrier. You actually saw criminals being recruited directly into state security forces.
Seriously.
Yeah. Think of Milorad Ulemek, the Jizya. He was involved with Arkan's Tigers, later commanded the JSO, the Special Operations Unit. It was this dangerous mix of state power and criminal elements.
That's deeply concerning.
And then there was the cigarette smuggling. We mentioned the $100 billion figure earlier. That was largely during the 90s sanctions.
An unbelievable amount of money.
It fueled everything.
Yeah.
Enriched the mafia, corrupted state institutions, created this kind of symbiosis that lasted for ages. Guys like Stanko Subotic made fortunes from it.
Right. And at the center of a lot of this 90s activity was Hilshko Rashnotovic, Arkan.
Arkan, yeah. His story's wild. Bank robber, then leader of the Serb volunteer Guard the Tigers during the wars, and he becomes the most powerful guy in the Serbian underworld.
What gave him that edge? How did he become so dominant?
Charisma, ruthlessness, his paramilitary background gave him power and, for some, legitimacy. Plus, he married Seka, the famous singer.
Right, Svetlana Rajnatovic. That boosted his profile, too.
Massively. And, of course, the sheer amount of money flowing around helped him consolidate control.
But even with Arkan on top, there were still tensions. You mentioned Goran Vukovic earlier. Were there wars between gangs?
Oh, yeah. There was a big gang war in Belgrade after Aleksandar Nijevic Nelly was murdered. So even with Arkan being dominant, it was still a violent, competitive scene.
That instability never really goes away, does it?
Seems not. But that whole wartime period, the expansion, the state links, it really set the stage for their international growth later on.
Okay, so that takes us into the 2000s. Arkin gets assassinated in 2000. Big power vacuum again.
Huge. And a really violent scramble to fill it. Lots of money was being made illegally in Serbia around then, which attracted some very ruthless players.
Like the Zemin clan, they become notorious around this time.
Exactly. The Zeman clan rose up, known for just extreme brutality, but also for having deep connections inside the state.
How deep?
Well, there's this claim, which is pretty shocking, that by the early 2000s, the Serbian Mafia was actually richer and better armed than the Serbian government and police.
Wait, richer and better armed than the state itself?
That's the assertion, yeah.
Hmm.
Attributed largely to the systemic corruption under Milosevic, the state was allegedly deeply compromised.
That's incredible. And it feels like that dangerous situation leads directly to the assassination of the Prime Minister, Zoran Inić, in 2003.
It was a stark illustration of that nexus, absolutely. Inić was killed by people from the Special Operations Unit, the Red Berets, working with the Zeman clan.
So elements of the state security apparatus itself colluding with organized crime to kill the Prime Minister.
Precisely. It was a massive shock. Led to Operation Sabre, this huge crackdown. Thousands arrested, many groups dismantled.
Did that clean things up?
It had an impact, definitely. But think about this during Sabre. They arrested Milan Saradlic. He was the deputy state prosecutor.
And
He was on the Zeman clan's payroll.
the deputy state prosecutor, wow, shows how deep the rot went.
Exactly. Pervasive corruption right into the justice system.
So, post-Sabre, does the landscape change? We start hearing about these big international groups, right? Focusing more on things like cocaine, like Group America.
Yes, that's a key shift. The Serbian Mafia really goes transnational. Group America, sometimes called El Cartel de las Balcanes, becomes a major player in global cocaine trafficking.
Too major.
Europol and the DEA estimated they were bringing something like 500 tons of cocaine into Europe annually.
500 tons a year, that's industrial scale.
Absolutely. Requires massive logistics networks all over the place. Their boss, Dion Stanimirovic, became one of Europe's most wanted.
And then you have guys like Darko Šarić, estimated worth in the billions.
Yeah, Eric's assets were estimated at one point around $27 billion. Put him up there with the richest alleged mafia bosses anywhere.
How did they manage such huge volumes of cocaine?
A key thing was they apparently established direct links with producers in South America. Cut out the middlemen.
Went straight to the source. Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about some of these key international figures. Zhika Amsterdam. That's quite a nickname.
Sreten Jacic. Yeah, he apparently earned that name by dominating the drug scene in the Netherlands. Became known as the cocaine king there.
How? Just by being tough.
Tough, ruthless, eliminated rivals, had direct lines to Colombian cartels. He was even implicated in the murder of a Croatian journalist, though acquitted later. Shows his reach and methods.
Transnational violence, and then the Pink Panthers. They're almost legendary.
They really are. Famous for these incredibly bold, almost cinematic jewel heists. All over the world, Dubai, Tokyo, Paris, London.
Meticulously planned.
Extremely. Known for their speed and precision. They've stolen hundreds of millions of euros worth of jewelry over the years.
Okay, and let's circle back to Group America. You mentioned its scale. How did it start? Its origins are in New York, right?
Yeah, with Boško Radonjic, the Yugo,
Yeah.
a Serbian nationalist, got involved with the Westies, the Irish-American gang in NYC.
The Westies from Hell's Kitchen.
That's them. When their leaders went to prison, Radonjic apparently stepped up, brought in other Serbs, and crucially made links with the Gambino crime family.
So an early connection to the American Mafia.
Seems so. Then, during the Yugoslav wars, Radonjic and others went back, allegedly hooked up with Serbian security services again, laying the groundwork.
And from there, it grew into this global drug syndicate.
Under subsequent leaders, yeah, like Vojislav Rajcevic, Voja the American. Even after he disappeared, the group kept growing. Figures like Mileta Miljanic became important.
And more recently, there's talk of Edin Nikanin, Tito.
Intelligence suggests Gagnon or Tito is now a really key player, especially running things on the ground in South America after Zoran Djekic got arrested.
So he's managing the supply side.
Seems to be. Maintaining the connections, managing logistics for these huge cocaine shipments makes them very powerful.
And there are others operating down there, too.
Definitely. Goran Nisic was another big one. Powerful drug lord in South America, tied to Group America, known for living this incredibly lavish lifestyle in Brazil. Shows the kind of money involved.
It really paints a picture of a global operation. Where else are they active besides Serbia and South America?
All over, really. Europe is key. Austria, Germany, especially for things like cigarette smuggling historically. The Netherlands is a huge hub for drugs.
What about further afield?
Australia, definitely.
Mm.
Reports link them to biker gangs there, North America through Group America and others, even reports of connections in Africa for various activities. It's truly a global footprint.
And in the U.S., there was this specific group, the YACS, Yugoslavians, Albanians, Croatians, Serbians.
Yeah, the YACS group, mainly New York area. They weren't structured like the traditional mafia families, more like a loose network.
What did they do?
Specialized in things like ATM robberies, big supermarket burglaries,
Right.
caused huge losses. They were known for being effective, partly because of shared background, a strong code of silence.
And they worked with the mafia sometimes.
Allegedly, yeah. Kind of like an enforcement arm for some families. Valued because they were ruthless and wouldn't talk to the cops.
And there were even whispers about where their money went.
Suspicions that some of the millions they stole got funneled back to the Balkans, maybe to fund paramilitary groups during the conflicts. Shows how crime and conflict can intertwine.
And they have allies too, right? Other major crime groups.
Oh yeah, the sources mentioned connections to loads of groups. The Albanian Mafia, Italy's Ndrangheta, various South American cartels. It's
Yes.
a vast web of alliances.
Okay, so bringing it more up to date, the 2010s. What's been happening more recently?
Well, law enforcement kept trying to tackle them. Operations like Balkan Warrior, targeted drug networks, made arrests.
But they still have power.
Seems so. You had narco-mafia groups actually making credible threats against top Serbian officials during that time. Shows they weren't exactly running scared.
And then there's this Principi group led by Veljko Belivuc. That sounds quite recent and worrying.
Extremely worrying. This group had, by all accounts, very close links to parts of the Serbian state. Belivuc himself even claimed he did dirty work for the government.
Claimed he worked for the government? Doing what?
He didn't specify publicly beyond dirty work, but he and his group were arrested and are facing charges for incredibly brutal crimes. Murder, kidnapping, torture.
And the state connection angle is part of that investigation?
It's a huge part of the discussion around it, yes. Suggests that this problematic entanglement between organized crime and state elements is, sadly, maybe still an issue today.
That historical pattern just keeps repeating, it seems. Finally, just quickly, their cultural impact. They pop up in movies and stuff, right?
They do. Films, TV shows, books, even video games. Often sensationalized, of course. But it reflects how notorious they become globally. Their reputation for ruthlessness has definitely made an impression.
Right. So wrapping this up, it's been quite a journey. From Yugoslavia in the 70s to this massive international criminal force today.
We've seen the evolution, the deep, troubling links to political and economic structures, the sheer range of crimes they're involved in.
And some really surprising details came out, the alleged state sponsorship early on, the mind-boggling money involved.
Yeah, which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Given these historical links and potentially ongoing ones between the Serbian Mafia and state institutions, what does that really mean?
What are the long-term effects for stability, for governance, not just in the Balkans, but everywhere they operate?
Exactly. And also, think about groups like Group America with their global reach, their alliances. Yeah. How effective can international police efforts really be against networks that are so embedded, so adaptable?
Tough questions. No easy answers there. And like we said, this deep dive, it's really just scratching the surface, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's so much more to uncover about their influence, their operations. Definitely a topic worth exploring further if you're interested.